Today, I want to share with you something that's really important and that you need to know before you buy farmland or a homestead. Now, disclaimer, I'm not a real estate agent or in that business. But we purchased our property about 7 years ago, and I want to share with you some of the hiccups we experienced, some of the things I wish I knew then that I know now, and everything we've learned since being on our farm that may help you when it comes time to make a decision on whether you want to buy a farm or a homestead. We're going to go through topography, legal challenges, and everything in between. So let's do it. So the first thing you need to decide for yourself are, what are your needs and goals? Why are you buying this property? Is it for a homestead and just to be a little more self-sufficient? Is it to actually start a farm business? That's going to play a big part in deciding how big your property is, where your property is located, and what you plan to do on your property. Am I trying to become the next Greg Judy or Joel Salatin, or maybe the next Connor Crickmore? Or maybe you just want to be a little bit more self-sufficient, live off the land, produce for yourself, become less dependent and more independent, just escaping the city or suburbia and the norms that go along with that to live more free, just in harmony with nature. The reason you need to think about that is because the size of your property should match your dreams.
Boom, size does matter.
Size does matter.
Enough room to accommodate your ambitions, but you don't want to necessarily be starting a nature preserve. Then the other thing you got to think about is your budget. What's your budget for what you want to do? Your budget should include more than just the sticker price of the land. You'll need to think of everything from if you're going to need fencing on your property, if you're tilling land to set up a garden, machinery, equipment, buildings, the things that you want to follow your dream and achieve your goal. That's going to cost more, obviously, than just the price of the land itself. So it's something you need to factor in when you're looking for that piece of land or property. It's kind of like going on a road trip. You can't just plan on the gas that you're going to buy. You've also got to plan on motels you're going to stay at, and snacks, souvenirs, admission costs, tourist attractions. There's just a lot of budget constraints that goes when you're buying a property, and it helps to kind of put all those down and realize up front before you jump into a property what else you're going to need to go with that property. Once you've got the idea of what you want to do and somewhat of a budget that you're going to use, the next thing we need to do is research locations. And by locations, I mean all that goes along with that. What are your water resources going to be? What's the climate like where you want to go? What are the weather patterns? And what do you have to worry about when it comes to weather? What's the soil quality of the place that you're looking at? These are all considerations you have to think about when looking for a property. So first, talking about climate and weather patterns, something you have to realize is that Mother Nature doesn't always agree with our farming plans. The climate and Mother Nature dictates what crops you're going to grow if you're going the veg route, or what animals you can raise if you're going the livestock route. If it's an area that constantly gets a lot of rain, then you have to think about where you're planting your vegetables. Is that an area that's going to flood commonly? If you're doing livestock, if you get a lot of rain, is that an area they're going to constantly tear up because it doesn't drain well? One thing about pastures is that if cattle tear them up, they take a long time to recover, and it's not just grass coming back up. You're going to have a lot of weeds and a lot of other things that are going to make your grass-fed beef operation more of a challenge. Then let's not forget, if there's a dwelling on the property, where is that located? You don't want to be playing survivor on your own property because the dwelling is located in an area that's prone to flooding or that has really poor drainage. So when you're looking at a property, it's something just to keep in mind, is to look around, try to see the water patterns, how water might affect certain areas. And I would think of it in terms as worst case scenarios, meaning you get a lot of rain, what's that going to do? Or if we get no rain, what is that going to mean? Just remember, when it comes to weather, you'd rather be the prepared farmer rather than the surprised one. Let's talk about soil quality and fertility. Think of that as the foundation of your farming or homesteading dreams. It's not just about acquiring a lot of land, but what that land can do for you. Good soil quality is one of the most important things. It's going to determine whether the nutrients, the pH, the balance of the soil is going to be right for growing crops or vegetables, or growing pasture for your livestock. What you don't want to do is spend more time fighting the land than farming it. So it's definitely something to think about, is maybe getting the soil tested or getting it checked if you find a property that you like or one that you think about. Again, regenerative practices can definitely bring soil back, but that takes a lot of work and money up front, and also you have to have time to make that happen. And if you're in a position where you're purchasing land and you need to get a farm or a business going, you may not have that time. Also, when it comes to your soil fertility, try to find out the history of the land. Was it farmed in crops for a number of years? Knowing the history of the land will give you a lot of clues as to the work you may need to regenerate a pasture, or what it's going to take to get a pasture going. Also, just walk the property and observe the plants. That's another good way to try to determine the health of the land. You see a lot of healthy crops and flowers and things are looking good. It's not a guarantee, but it's a good indication that the soil is fertile and supporting a multi-species of plants. And that can help you make make a decision if you're thinking about turning it into pasture or turning it into a garden for vegetables. Along with soil, we need to talk about water. That is a huge thing with any property that you're going to buy. One, you need it yourself for living, for cooking, for baths, for lots of things. We need water just to survive ourselves. But also when you have to factor in that you're starting a homestead or a farming enterprise, then you have to think about if you're going to need to irrigate plants, if you're going to have a water source for your livestock. If you're thinking about doing cattle, they drink a lot. So you have to be prepared that there's going to be enough water to sustain you and to provide enough for your livestock or other enterprise that you're thinking about doing. Does the land have ponds? Is it on a river? Does it have creeks? Those are some other things to consider, especially for livestock, because you can find ways to use those to help with your livestock or irrigate your crops. There are some areas that have water scarcity, so you need to check on too if there's any regulations with the water, what you can and can't use it for, and we'll get a little bit more into that into zoning, but that's something else that you need to consider when assessing water on the property that you're looking at. That information should be easily found out by talking with your realtor or contacting the county that you're looking at moving into. If there is water on the property, evaluating how it's going to work into your dream of whether you're doing vegetables or livestock. What other infrastructure are you going to have to buy to make water accessible to those operations? Maybe you're lucky and it was already a farm and it has some of these things in place. That would be a great find. But just consider that as well when you're assessing water on a property that you're interested in. Also, going back to climate, that's going to play a big part into how much water you have. If it's been really dry or we haven't had a lot of rain and you notice that the creeks and stuff still look good, or that the wells are working fine, again, that can be another sign that you have a good source of water. If there is none there, you notice creeks dried up, then that could also be a sign that, hey, you may want to avoid that. Probably the last thing with water that I would consider too is what operations you're going to be doing, especially livestock. You want to make sure that you're protecting whatever water source you're looking at. So if you're, say, in a small acreage and you're thinking about doing cattle, well, you have to already plan that, okay, this part of the acreage can't be used for cattle because, again, you want to protect the waterways. If you do have water on the property, ponds, creeks, where are they located? And when you're considering what operation you're going to do, how is that going to be affected by that operation? All right, now that we've talked a bit about researching locations, now let's talk a little bit about legal and regulatory considerations that you might need to know about. First up is zoning laws. Those are like those subtle family rules that you might not know about until you break one and the county shows up to let you know. Zoning laws are basically the guidelines that kind of give you a gentle nudge on what you can and can't do in your property. Sometimes it's an actual push. Thinking about building a barn on your property? Well, you'll want to check with your county to make sure that where you're at is zoned to do that. Many locations are zoned for agriculture, for industry, for many different things, and that determines what you can and can't do there. For instance, in the middle of a city, you couldn't just put livestock or a barn because that's zoned for city stuff. And same thing out in the country. Even if you're out in the country, you need to make sure that it's zoned, if you're thinking about homesteading or farming, for agricultural. There's also residential, which you're probably getting away from. Many of you might be familiar with laws in your county, if you're in a suburb, that you can only have a certain number of chickens, or you can't have roosters. Well, zoning, that's what it all comes down to, way an area is zoned. And these zoning laws differ from one area to another, from one county to another, from one state to another. So don't assume that what a friend of yours did or Farmer Joe another county over did that you'll be able to do on your property, because that might not be the case. Kind of like reading the terms and conditions of something you're going to buy, knowing your zoning laws is definitely something that's boring. You really don't want to do it, but you should really know what the rules are about the place that you're moving to. These zoning laws can easily be found online. Usually you can just research the county that you're moving to. They'll have a government site. They should have a map that'll show you what the zoning laws are. Also, your real estate agent or whoever's helping you buy the property can also be a great resource to help with that. Now let's talk a bit about property taxes. Oh, property taxes. The lifetime subscription you didn't know you signed up for when you bought your property. I have mixed feelings about property taxes. I know our society needs things like roads, police, firemen, but I also know that taxes are always going up. Yep, that's property taxes. Basically, you have to think of them like your farm's annual fee or your homestead's annual fee for owning it. And understanding these taxes is crucial on any property that you're buying. That's because they can vary so much from county to county, city to city, state to state. This is definitely something you want to talk with your realtor about and know exactly what the taxes are going in before you purchase a property. Taxes are one of those things that even a couple percent, kind of like interest rates on a house, can make a huge difference in how much money you're going to spend over the long-term use of the property. Again, taxes do fund some services we need, so I'm not bashing that from that standpoint. But at the same time, you want to make sure that any property that you're looking at, that you're going to be able to not only pay the sticker price for the property, but that you're going to be able to deal with the ongoing taxes that you're going to have to pay while you occupy that property. Follow the tax code and you're good. And I can tell you, starting a business really helps you with your tax burden, provided you follow the rules laid out for small businesses when it comes to taxes. Now let's transition to easements. That's another regulatory thing you need to know about. An easement is basically a right of way on your property that gives someone else permission to come through your property or on your property for some predetermined reason. This can be something like a road to power lines. There may not be a road to the power lines. Either way, if you've got power lines on your property, the electric company likely has an easement to get to those power lines. That shouldn't sound like a big deal until you show up on your property one day and they're spraying under those power lines with god-awful chemicals to prevent growth under it. So you definitely want to know all of your easements and what those that have those easements can do on your property. We have power lines on our property, and we actually had to contact the power companies and tell them that we're a do not spray property so that they would come in and actually cut rather than spraying. That was an instance that happened to us a number of years ago. It was literally 20 people with backpacks getting out of trucks, and luckily we caught them before they started spraying a lot. That would have been so much chemicals on our property, and all because of an easement to the power lines. We have another easement on our property where our neighbor across the street has a disconnected piece of property across the road and on the other side of our property that's along the river. And so they have an easement on one end of our property to go down to their property. And that was something that previous owners and them agreed upon, and it's a legal document that comes with that. So any easement on any property that you're looking at should be readily available through the county. Again, a good real estate agent will help you work through that, but make them aware that you want to know all the easements on the property so that you can know what you might be dealing with on that property should you purchase it or even start an operation. All right, now let's briefly touch on analyzing the topography and the layout of the land that you're looking at. The slopes and topography of the land will determine the type of farming you're going to do and what you can or cannot build on the property, as well as where you're going to put any structures or equipment on the property. In assessing your land topography, you're really just trying to solve future problems that might arise. You put your barn in the wrong area, it's going to end up with a lot of water if it's at the bottom of a hill. Also, where you put some of your structures, are you going to be able to get a road there? The infrastructure of your farm is going to be really important when it comes to starting up whatever operation you're doing, so you want to try to be as efficient with that as you can. And the topography and the land kind of determine where your roads, buildings, structures, gardens, pastures, all that stuff's going to go. You know, if you have some really steep slopes, they make for some really pretty pictures, especially if you're overlooking a pasture or something, but they're also not going to make great pastures themselves, as you're not going to rotate cattle on a slope. You're not going to build a house on a slope. You're typically not going to put a road down a slope, depending on the grade. And then let's talk about roads. You may be able to get a tractor or something to the pasture that you're going to, and you get it all built and set. But then you have to think about that you're going to be hauling loads of cattle possibly in there. You're going to be hauling cattle out of there. Again, you can maybe set it up to where the cattle move to another area, but it's just really important to factor in the equipment you're going to be using and what you're really going to need to get to those areas on your property. If it's a really marshy area, then that's going to determine your ability to put a road there or for it to be pasture. And that goes back to a little bit in the beginning where we were talking about soil quality and such. And just an important factor when you're considering the topography and the layout of your property that you're looking at. Then, are there any existing structures on the property? You know, especially looking at a lot of old farmland, there could be some really cool relics and historical things on the farm that really give it that farm feel and look good. But there could also be some DIY projects that make you question your life's choices. So it's something you have to think about. Or what are the structures on the land? Are you going to be able to use them? What's going to be required to make them usable? Or are they just going to be a hassle and it's going to cost you money to either have them torn down or removed? All right, let's move on to understanding your local community and neighbors. That's going to play a big part into anywhere that you move. You know, when it comes to talking about community dynamics, your neighbors, your local market, you're not just buying land, you're almost marrying into a new family. Especially in small towns and close-knit communities, it's really important to understand the dynamics of those communities and how things work. Getting to know your local farming community is really key. If you're farming, it's really good to get to know who the other farmers are in the area, who your neighbors are, because they can provide you with so many tidbits of wisdom, advice, history of the land that you're at, and can even help you with projects. They have spare parts for maybe your tractor. They can just be a treasure trove of help and wisdom, and so it's really important to get to know those in your immediate community. Think about support systems if you're starting a small farm or homestead. And knowing those in your community, well, if you've got cows out at 4 in the morning, they're going to be the ones who can help you get them back in. If something's attacking your chickens, they're going to be the ones that can tell you local resources, what to look out for, what it might be. If you're having problem growing something, they can probably tell you that, hey, this was done to the soil a long time ago, or in this region you need to do this or that. So when you're looking or assessing a property that you're thinking about buying, have lunch in town, walk the streets of the town, just try to get a feel for the dynamics of the community and how you'd fit into that. And then there's also your neighbors. They can be invaluable resources for your farming or homesteading journey. Knowing your neighbors just opens up the door to so many opportunities in the community and a support structure that you can have, as well as being a support structure for your neighbor. Something else about having neighbors is that there needs to be neighborliness, meaning if you're moving on a property and the house is right on the boundary and there's 50 pigs right across the fence, something you got to think about. If you're considering starting a farm or homestead, need to think about where your neighbor's property are. Obviously, you have the right to do what you want on your property, but also being neighborly means respecting their property as well. Sometimes working with your neighbors requires patience, it requires understanding, but trying to achieve that relationship with your neighbor can prevent a lot of headaches down the road. You know, if your tractor breaks down or your cattle decide to explore the other boundaries of the property at dawn, your neighbors are the ones that could be impacted by that, but it can also help you with that. So remember, just with neighbors and any property that you're looking at, it's a two-way street, and you're looking for just mutual respect and cooperation will make both of your lives much easier. So if you do buy a property, invest in cultivating a good relationship with your neighbors. Doing so will not only enrich your farming or homesteading journey, but also helps contribute to a community that will thrive and grow together. Now let's move on to talk about infrastructure and utilities. Another big consideration when looking for a property. You need to make sure you evaluate the essentials. That's water, electricity, and sewage. These are like the holy trinity of farming or homesteading. First up, let's talk about electricity. It's not just for keeping your phone charged or watching the YouTubes and the TikTok, but it powers everything from your heat to your refrigerator to the electric fences that keep your animals in. And keeping your animals in is important unless you want them to become a roadside attraction. Trust me, been there. And water. We touched on that a little bit earlier, but does the property have lakes, ponds? Does it have a well? Is it on residential or city water? You need water for cooking, for baths, for livestock, for, well, you know, surviving. So again, we already touched on that, but water, another very big consideration. And then sewage. If you want to keep your dream farm or homestead from becoming a nightmare, definitely check out what the sewage is on the property. You don't want to be the one discovering when that septic tank's not working anymore. If off-grid's your goal, it's not much of a problem, but if you're moving to start farming or homesteading in more of a modern way and enjoy the amenities of a toilet and such, then sewage comes in really important.
TMI, my friend.
Also, if it is a septic tank, that can be very costly if there's problems with it. So it's definitely something you want to get checked out prior to purchasing a property. And then I'll add in one more little thing is internet. Especially for what we do here farming, we do YouTube, internet's super important. For some, it may not be that important, but it's definitely something to consider to any property that you're moving to. These days, you have Starlink and some other things that can get you internet in rural properties if there isn't lines running. But just be sure to inquire whether there's internet, what kind, and think about for your farm dream or homesteading dream or what you're gonna do, how essential internet is for that. Now let's talk about some potential challenges and how to overcome them. We're not going to go in deep here, but some other considerations is based on the location, what kind of wildlife is there? What kind of predators do you need to worry about? If you're doing a garden, what other pests do you need to worry about? Again, everything eats chickens. So if you're doing chickens, you really want to know what the wildlife is in the area that you're looking at. Weather extremes are also another thing to think about. If you have really, really hot summers, you may want to reconsider getting solid black cattle. At the same time, if you have really, really cold winters, pigs out on pasture may not do very well. So just another consideration is the weather extremes at the property that you're looking for. Market fluctuations is another thing to think about. This is a pretty rare thing, but obviously with COVID, if your whole business was to be selling chickens to restaurants, you know, that shut down and that was gone. So try to assess the market if you're thinking about farming or selling products from your farm, what the market's like and how you can weather if such extreme conditions happen. Again, they might not, but it's better to be prepared than not prepared. And I think if anything, COVID taught us that. And then you have to think about just long-term sustainability. And that's about like keeping a promise with your land. It's less about quick wins when you're dealing with Mother Nature, and it's more like a marathon. You'll want to try to adopt practices like rotating crops, rotating animals, maybe investing in solar and renewable energy sources at some point, as those are the things that when you do pull the trigger on a property are really going to help make that property sustainable for you for a long time. You know, kind of think of it like a savings account. The more you put into it, the more you're going to reap from it. You know, it's making sure that your farm or homestead is continuously improving, whether that be raising animals, making profit, doing doing the things you need to do to survive, but also making the land and the environment better as a result of the practices that you do to achieve those goals. All right, you'll notice the scene has changed because I was losing light outside, so I figured I'd bring it in here we could see a little bit better. But let's talk about expansion possibilities. When you're looking at a property, that's something else to consider, is that if you are looking to do an operation, say farming, whether that be livestock or vegetables, you want to think about, if you're really going full steam with this, are you able to expand in the future? Again, it can be one of those problems that you address when you get there, but it's still something to have in the back of your mind when you're looking at any property. Do remember, though, that expanding goes along with what we talked about previously, that it's not something you want to do too big or too fast. Still respect the land. That will pay you back in dividends in the long run. Resale value is another consideration to think about. Not really think about, but look at the areas around what you're buying. We all, if we're going to invest in a property, we hope that at some point it appreciates and that we can either leave it for our kids or down the road, make more money. It's worth more money than when we bought it. Now, this is not necessarily something you can predict, but there are factors. Is it located in an area that's growing? Is it near metropolitan areas or cities? All of those things will affect the long-term value of the property. In retrospect, you could lose money on the property. Think about if they're planting a big solar farm right beside you, or the area is growing so fast that you're going to be surrounded by houses and apartments based on trends near your property. So just researching the areas around your property, see what's happening to them, see what the history is of that, will help guide you a little bit in making a decision or giving you a peace of mind knowing what your property could potentially be in the future. A couple tips that I can recommend are, one, consider doing a land survey. That's where they'll come out and legally check where exactly the boundaries are, what the easements are on the property. Now, this can be pricey is the only downside, but in my opinion, if you're going to spend a couple $100,000 and you're really serious about the property, it could be something worth doing. This, obviously, you're not going to do this with every property that you check, but if it comes down to a property that just seems perfect and you think it's the one you want to go with, it could be money well spent in that it could really tell you what the boundaries are, if somebody's fence lines are on your side or your fences are on somebody else's side. And even if it gives you information that makes you decide not to buy that property, it was still worth the money because it saved you hundreds of thousands down the road. So just something to consider. Also, check with previous owners or your real estate agent. They may be able to find a survey that had been done recently on the property. Another tip would be to hire experts. A lot of people choose to try to do this on their own or not use realtors. After buying a few houses, I think realtors are definitely worth it. There's a lot to buying a house, behind the scenes stuff, nuances that even after we've bought a few houses, I wouldn't want to try it without a good realtor. They're almost like a good tax person. The money that you spend in them, they will double, triple, quadruple that money back in value that they provide you in getting that property and knowing about the property that you're buying. They're the ones that are going to be able to hook you up with a good title company to make sure that the title's clean. They can also investigate for easements, for a history of the property. They can also give you insight into the area that you're buying the property in and what that area is doing and what you can maybe expect from that area in the future. So again, I think a good realtor is worth their weight in gold. Definitely consider getting a good realtor. And then another tip is when you're looking for properties, visit multiple properties. Again, sometimes it's easy to see that first one, fall in love with it and just go for it, but try to visit multiple properties. It'll just give you sometimes things that maybe in your property, you'll visit another property and see something that you didn't realize or you didn't think about. Doesn't mean you still can't go for the first property, but again, I would visit a couple properties just to see the characteristics of each property. And again, you'll likely learn something from each one that'll help you in making a better decision on the one that you decide to purchase. So in conclusion, a lot of homework to do when you're buying a property. And this is by no means a comprehensive guide. These are just some things that we dealt with when buying our farm, and then after owning a farm, some things that I wish I would have known a little more about. We actually didn't know about the easement our neighbor had to go across our property to get to their river part of the property.
Did you have a clue? Not a clue.
And you might think it's not a big deal until you realize you can't turn that area into a pasture, or you can't do a garden or anything there because you've got to leave that easement open for egress and ingress and for people getting in and out of it. Same thing with power lines and stuff. So again, just sharing what we know. Again, I'm not a real estate agent. I'm just sharing what we've been through and what we've dealt with in buying our property and what we've learned from it. So if you're thinking about buying a farm or homestead, I think it's a great decision. Just being sustainable or making money from your own land, both are just so rewarding and such a great way to live life. All right, other than that, click the like button, subscribe button, all the buttons that you're supposed to click. Oh, and there's one more tip down below in the comments. Check that out, and we'll catch you in the next one. All right.